The showers continuing into western parts through the night, whilst the persistent rain carries on in the far northeast of Scotland, along with the brisk wind. But for most, it's a frost-free night, a good deal of cloud cover, low cloud at that, so a gloomy start to Wednesday. A lot of mist and sea fog around some of these western, southern and northeastern shores. The rain in the far northeast of Scotland tends to ease through the day. It continues, I think, for Orkney and Shetland for much of Wednesday. Otherwise, brighter skies follow, but further heavy showers, perhaps even a few thunderstorms across parts of southern England and East Wales. But it will feel warm where we get some sunshine, 20 or 21 Celsius. And for Scotland, less cold compared to today, but still temperatures are not far from average for the time of year in Scotland, whilst it's sunnier and warmer elsewhere. And then into the outlook, well, the weather turns warmer still heading into the Easter weekend. For many places, it turns brighter, but there will still be a few showers around.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the briefing this lunchtime, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up between now and 1 o'clock. We'll be hearing from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, who is in Scotland. He's been speaking to GB News. We'll bring you that interview. Also, after the sexual assault conviction of a Tory MP, some senior Conservatives seem to be defending him. But we'll be asking why, and also why do these Westminster sex scandals keep happening? Also coming up today, disturbing but unconfirmed reports of chemical weapon attacks by Russian forces in Ukraine. We'll get the reaction from a prominent Ukrainian MP. And we'll be speaking to a pollster about the Conservatives' election hopes next month and whether Rishi Sunak's trouble is causing the Conservatives some pain. And as always, we want to hear from you. Do get in touch. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. That and so much more over the next hour. But first, at the top of the hour, here's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date. The UK has warned all options will be on the table when it comes to the West's response if Russia uses chemical weapons in Ukraine. The government says it's working urgently to try to verify claims that chemical weapons were used in the attack on the besieged city of Mariupol. The Foreign Secretary described any such action as a callous escalation in the conflict. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told GB News he's worried about a renewed assault in the east.
I'm concerned in that I think that the fighting that is going to happen this spring and this summer in the Donbass is going to be extremely violent and will be quite a big army on quite a big army. They clearly have the May the 9th victory parade in mind as a date by which they need to have achieved something.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the chemical weapons threat is very real.
Один з рупорів окупантів заявив про те, що вони
One of the spokespeople of the invaders said they are considering using chemical weapons against the defenders of Mariupol. We take it very seriously. I want to remind world leaders that a possible use of chemical weapons had already been discussed by the Russian military. At the time, it meant the reaction to the Russian aggression should have been harsher and faster.
Meanwhile, Russia's president says attempts to isolate his country from the rest of the world will fail. Speaking in Russia's Far East, where he met his Belarusian counterpart, Vladimir Putin also said Moscow will never depend on the US and its allies again after they imposed crippling sanctions. In some other news now, the Conservative MP Crispin Blunt has apologised for defending convicted sex offender Imran Ahmed Khan. The Wakefield MP, who appeared in court yesterday, was found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy in 2008. He's now been expelled from the Tory party. Well, Crispin Blunt said Khan was the victim of a dreadful miscarriage of justice, but he retracted that statement this morning. The Met Police says officers have made another 30 referrals for fixed penalty notices following alleged COVID breaches at Downing Street and Whitehall. Well, this is up from the 20 referrals the force said had been made at the end of March and now takes the total to more than 50. They added there are large amounts of investigative material from which more referrals could still be made. More than 60 Extinction Rebellion activists have blocked a Lloyd's of London building. Using superglue, chains and bike locks to prevent access to the site, the demonstrators are demanding the company stops insuring fossil fuel projects. Lloyd's of London has advised its staff to not go to the affected office. Our reporter Alice Porter has the latest.
Extinction Rebellion have been here for over 4 hours, causing so much trouble in the centre of the city. They've blockaded entrances and exits into Lloyd's. Many of them have glued their hands to the floor or have chained themselves to the railings to stop anyone coming in and out. The reason they're targeting Lloyd's is they say they insure fossil fuel technology, and they've been protesting last Friday of people coming into the city in regards to that. But they're also trying to recruit more people. Protesters say to me they're trying to recruit 3.5% of the population to join Extinction Rebellion and continue causing chaos in London and other cities as well.
The number of people on payrolls rose by 35,000 between February and March, but figures from the Office for National Statistics also show workers suffered the biggest fall in real pay for almost 9 years. Experts are warning wages are set to lag even further, with inflation expected to soar by autumn. More people are said to be worried about their finances than they are about catching coronavirus. Nearly half of those surveyed by researchers at University College London say they don't feel in control of their money because of the cost of living, while only a third are concerned about catching the infection. A £2.6 billion government programme to improve flood defences is being expanded. The Department for Environment says 314,000 homes are now better protected following the original investment. The national flood risk is said to have been reduced by 5% over the past 6 years. The government says over £5 billion has been allocated for the next 6 years to come. You're up to date. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head to Darren for the lunchtime briefing.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. It is 6 minutes past 12 o'clock. We're online, on TV and on your DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company on this Tuesday afternoon. We're going to bring you that interview with Sir Keir Starmer, who's been talking to GB News up in Scotland in just a couple of minutes' time, and also reflecting that breaking news about the latest round of fixed penalty notices or fines for staff in Downing Street and Whitehall. We're going to start the programme, though, with Ukraine, because overnight the UK and US stated that they were looking into claims that Russia had used chemical weapons in the city of Mariupol. The West has not been able to verify these claims yet, and the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss tweeted last night that reports that Russian forces may have used chemical agents in an attack on the people of Mariupol. We're working urgently with partners to verify details. Any use of such weapons would be a callous escalation in this conflict, and we will hold Putin and his regime to account. While we wait to bring you more on these claims, joining me now from Kyiv is Liesa Vasylenko, who is a member of the Ukrainian Parliament, and also says that members of her family have been waiting for up to 3 weeks to be able to come to the UK, and we'll come on to those visa issues in a moment. But first of all, have you got any more information about these suggestions, these allegations of the potential use of chemical weapons?
There are allegations, and we have received reports last night from Mariupol, from the battalions that are stationed there, that there have been explosions, and as a result of those explosions, some military personnel have been down with symptoms clearly attributable to a chemical attack. What it is as of yet, it's impossible to tell, but there's definitely something going on there, and we might be seeing more of these as the Russian army has proven themselves to be absolutely inhumane in their methods that they apply. They do not follow the rules of war. They do not stop at anything, and they have zero value for human life. Not even the soldiers, of course, but even the civilians. They fall prey and they fall victim to the atrocities of the Russian army.
If these allegations are proven to be true, and we know that the West is looking into them, I mean, what would you like to see the reaction from the international community to be?
Well, first of all, Ukraine has always said that we need more weapons, but next to these weapons, we also need personal protection gear for the military and for the civilians. We need the gas masks, we need the chemical suits to be there available. We need help organizing bunkers and safe places where to shelter from such attacks. And of course, we need weapons and more weapons to keep fighting off the Russians and their aggression in whatever form it may come.
Let's move on, if we can, to the refugee situation. I believe that you've got members of your family who are trying to come to the UK, but it's proving quite difficult.
It's actually already sorted, not just for my family, but for the dozens of families who I'm taking care of and who I'm trying to get evacuated from Ukraine, from the eastern parts of Ukraine especially, and who have even those who have made safe passage, but for example are stuck in neighboring countries which are no longer able to cater and provide for the needs of Ukrainians. But since the process was taking a lot of the time, I have families who were looking for safe passage and for shelter, who are now actually coming back to Ukraine because they feel that wherever they go, they are still going to be in one form or another of a certain danger, and it's better to be at home and sort of with the approach of better the devil you know and better the place that you know, at least they are home. So we have situations like that as well with people coming back home.
Yeah, it's good to see that at least in Western Ukraine it seems relatively safe at the moment, which is clearly good news. Just in terms of those who are trying to get to the UK, great news that it is now sorted. Was the process difficult, or was it relatively straightforward? Clearly the UK government has made an effort, hasn't it, to welcome lots of refugees, though some have found it difficult.
The UK people, the British people, have shown such tremendous support, as has the UK government. Unfortunately, the bureaucratic procedures are there, and this is what has taken a long time to sort through. It's not even the application process, because the families and their hosts, they found each other rather quickly, and there's an immediate connection because people want to help. It's just a normal humane sort of feeling and emotion of wanting to help those who are in real trouble and in a life-threatening situation. But then when the bureaucracy kicks in with all the checks and double checks and triple checks or whatever they had to do, and was just the system not working properly in the first couple of weeks, I noticed that there were a lot of applications that were just getting lost. Then I had cases where families were applying with children, and for example, a 5-year-old child would get a visa, and then her mother would have to wait for God knows how long, for like a week or maybe longer, to get her visa, and then things like that, which just didn't make sense. But I'm glad that we found a way to work through it, and that now the process is steadfast. But still, I think that there's room for improvement, as it's also about joining efforts and solidarity, not just towards Ukraine, but also towards the neighboring countries around Ukraine, like Poland, like Moldova, like Slovakia, Romania, who are actually unable to cater for the millions and hundreds of thousands of refugees from Ukraine who are going there. And I think that the UK here could do more to sort of alleviate this burden.
And we heard. Yeah, and we heard from the mayor of Warsaw yesterday saying just that he needed more assistance. Lesia, thank you so much indeed for joining us. That's Lesia Vasilenko joining us from Ukraine. She is a senior Ukrainian MP. Well, reacting to those reports overnight of a potential chemical attack in Ukraine, we've been speaking GB News to the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who's on a trip to Scotland today. Here's what he had to say. There he is. He was.
The reports of possible chemical weapons attacks are deeply disturbing, and if verified, and they need to be verified and checked, it's a significant escalation amounting to yet more war crimes. And it's very important that Putin is held to account for these attacks. We need to wait and see what's verified, but they're deeply, deeply disturbing reports that are coming out.
You've been meeting young people today, I saw you playing football, showing off your skills somewhat.
Fantastic to meet the young people here, and all credit to the community leaders and those that have set up all the activities that are going on here for those young people. It breaks my heart that it has to be done in this way, because both the SNP and the Tories have totally failed so many families who are really struggling to make ends meet. But absolute credit to all those that are organising this, supporting this. And we've heard from parents as to just how much they rely on this during the holidays.
What is the Labour Party doing to attract young voters?
With young voters, we are putting together packages for those that are trying to find their way into work. We've got strong views about what should happen in school. But the most important thing we're doing about young voters is listening to them. Too many politicians will come along and talk to you about what they think should happen for young people. My preference is to come to places like this, to be with young people, and allow them their own voice about what they want for their futures. And that's what we're doing in the Labour Party, listening to young people, working with young people, and in that way we can actually put in place measures and proposals that will help them, not just for the skills they need in life, the skills they need for work, but also recreational activities like this.
And what sort of other policies have you got on board to attract voters?
We've got very strong proposals on the key issue at the moment, which is the cost of living crisis. So as I go around Scotland, go around anywhere in the UK, the thing that's coming up over and over again is people saying, I can't afford to pay my bills. What are you going to do about it? So the Labour Party says we're going to have a windfall tax on oil and gas companies in the North Sea, profits they didn't expect to make because of the high global prices, use that to reduce energy bills by up to £600 for those that need it most. So from the Labour Party, what you've got is identifying the real issue of the day, a practical proposal to deal with it. Huge contrast to the SNP, who can't seem to find a way to back a windfall tax for some reason that eludes me, I have to say, and a Tory government that is going to have a loan in October that you have to pay back. So this is very much one of those issues where, it depends which side you're on, and we're on your side of working people who are struggling with their bills.
And nuclear energy as well, that's something that's very key and very at the heart of the Labour Party?
Yes, what we need is a response to the energy bills crisis and the energy security crisis that's thrown up by Ukraine. That means turbocharging on renewables, much warmer homes through insulation, but also fast-forwarding nuclear. And that's why we put out the proposal today in relation to that. We're the only party with a plan here. The SNP's got a blind spot here, going completely in the wrong direction. And the Tories, as ever, are serving their own ends rather than the ends of working people who desperately.
In Scotland, on a visit there, as you saw, with the Labour leader in Scotland as well. Let's move on, though, because a furious row was broken out in Westminster after the senior Conservative MP, Crispin Blunt, defended his colleague Imran Ahmed Khan, who had been convicted yesterday of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. Khan, seen here in the middle, had denied plying the boy with alcohol and groping him at a party back in 2008. He's now been expelled from the Tory party, but that didn't stop his fellow MP, Crispin Blunt, from tweeting this. Extraordinary defence. He says, "I'm utterly appalled and distraught at the dreadful miscarriage of justice that has befallen my friend and colleague. His conviction today is nothing short of an international scandal with dreadful wider implications for millions of LGBT+ Muslims." That prompted howls of outrage across the political spectrum in Westminster and beyond. And this morning, Mr. Blunt made a pretty swift U-turn, retracting his comments and saying in a statement that he is very sorry. "I'm very sorry that my defence of him has caused a significant upset and concern, not least to victims of sexual offences. It was not my intention to do this. To be clear, I do not condone any form of abuse." Well, joining me now to discuss this is Christian Calgie. He's the senior reporter at Guido Fawkes. Christian, thank you, as always, for joining us. Just first of all, there is a perception here, isn't there, that not just Crispin Blunt, it must be said, some other Conservative MPs wrote witness statements character statements, I should say, for Mr. Khan in court, that they do seem not to quite grasp the seriousness of all of this.
Yeah, and it comes so quickly after the whole scandal about Owen Paterson, where he'd been found to have majorly broken the Commons lobbying rules, and yet Tory MPs still felt it appropriate to go out of their way, indeed using taxpayer-funded stationery to try and lobby on his behalf to the courts. And it seems like there's this absolutely absurd sort of private members club culture in some aspects of the Tory party, which, regardless of how serious the offence of a colleague, they will close rank and defend them, even if it's cut and dry, even if they've been found guilty by an independent judiciary. They still think they know best and they're privy to all the details, and every single time it blows up in their face. And it's a remarkable pattern of behaviour that they just seem to refuse to take any lessons from.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I was reading the Playbook email this morning, and they were going through the lists of scandals that beset the government or the governing party in recent months. I mean, it's quite a long list, isn't it? I mean, is there a problem with discipline within the Tory party?
Well, there's always, if we think about the actual crime that's been committed here by Imran Khan, there's always a bit of an issue when a party is elected with a huge majority that they weren't necessarily expecting. And, I think Blair experienced it again in 97, where it turns out some of the MPs who were not anticipating to be elected and therefore were not, they'd not been looked into properly, do get elected and create some headaches for the party. That is to be expected. It's how the party handles that. The party hasn't been entirely bad on this, although, of course, there are allegations that the victim made a complaint to the party during the selection process for Mr. Khan, and that was ignored, although they claim that they have no record of such a complaint. But what is absolutely baffling is, the Tory party had withdrawn the whip. Following the sentencing, they'd expelled Khan as a member of the party. And yet hours later, MPs like Crispin Blunt still think that it's worth defending the MP when it seems a completely cut and dry issue. And to not only make that statement, but also, as we then revealed from a WhatsApp leak of the local party, to go further and claim that it was a minor incident to say that, oh, well, it doesn't need prosecuting because it was 14 years in the past. And to then have a massive row and be told by one of your prominent local councillors that you're not fit to serve in public life or stand for office. It's all deeply embarrassing. And I wouldn't even consider what Crispin Blunt put out this morning by way of a reversal as an apology. It's I'm sorry if you were offended, but I don't read there, I'm sorry for defending someone guilty of sexually assaulting a minor.
Indeed. And we're now looking, aren't we, should probably will win.
It's going to be incredibly difficult. I mean, I remember looking to Wakefield before 2019, and it fit the pattern of a seat that should really go Conservative, and it was always proved quite difficult. They finally got it over the line by, I think, about 3,000 votes in 2019. And looking at where the polls are now, it will be incredibly surprising if Labour didn't win it. I think it's going to be a very bitter battle. It's going to be very awkward for the Tories, but I guess all the parties have to wait for the formal appeals process to conclude before they can get on with selecting candidates. So we've got a bit of a way to go first.
Let's move on to Partygate if we can, because we got news in the last hour or so. An extra 30 fixed penalty notices of fines handed out by the Met to staff in Downing Street and Whitehall. A sign, of course, a reminder that not just was the guidance clearly not followed inside Number 10, even though they insisted that was the case for months, but clearly the law was broken itself. In saying that, we get emails from lots of our viewers saying, frankly, we don't care about this, the world has moved on. Has the world moved on?
Well, I think it's no longer the case that Boris is going to be toppled by Partygate. But you can see that in the way the opposition are using Partygate. There was a very definitive moment where, for example, at Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer stopped talking about Partygate and moved on to the cost of living crisis, because the Tory party isn't going to be brought down by Partygate, but it's very good for the opposition if they can sort of say, well, that's bedded in now. You know, the public have an opinion, they're not impressed, but now we're going to move on to the issues that will decide the election. And that is the strategy here. It looks bad, and it's certainly not helpful for the Tories that they're having to face this drip, drip, drip of occasional fines rather than the Metropolitan Police publishing them all at once. Downing Street are insisting still that Boris and nor Simon Case have received fines, and those are the two that we've been promised will be named if they receive fines. So for the moment, that seems okay, although it's still not certain they won't. And you know, it looks bad that it's dragging on. That is the problem here.
And just very finally, before we let you go, we must talk about the Chancellor. One Conservative MP this morning essentially saying he's toast, that this is pretty terminal for the Chancellor. Do you think it is?
I think chancellors have ridden out much worse unpopularity and worse scandals. It's obviously taken a massive hit. I do think most of the unpopularity at the moment is still very much driven by the cost of living crunch that people are facing, rather than Sunak's tax situation, and indeed his wife's tax situation. The only thing I'd say, by way of an alternative opinion, is it's not the worst strategy in the world for Rishi going ahead to a leadership battle to have this out in the open. You know, get the skeletons out of the closet now, and you won't have a massive upset when it comes to a leadership election. That might be one thing his team are considering as a silver lining to this issue, although, you know, it certainly shores up Boris for the time being that his main rival is in a very, very sticky patch.
Indeed, and that is, I mean, I'm glad you found a silver lining in it, or that his team are at least. He's got a long way to go before that. Thank you very much, as always, Christian, for joining us there from Westminster. Christian Calky there from Guido Fawkes. Thank you very much indeed. Talking about the Chancellor, it all seemed pretty good for him, didn't it? He was one of the highest rated cabinet ministers. Lots of suggestions that he was next in line to be Prime Minister. And then came the spring statement, and the criticism really hasn't stopped pouring in since then, including, of course, allegations about his wife's non-dom status and that he was in possession of a green card. Let's talk more about this with Joe Twyman. He's the co-founder of Delta Poll and joined us down the line. Joe, good afternoon to you. Again, just giving a sense of an historical sense there. Christian was saying that chancellors have been through a hell of a lot worse than this. But there is a momentum to this story and within the Conservative Party, concern or suggestions that Sunak might just go, you know what, I don't need this, I'm going to walk.
Yes, friends of the Chancellor say that he may decide he doesn't want to be an MP anymore and prefers to live in Southern California. Remains to be seen if that's actually the case or simply an interesting threat. I think there's a really interesting question to be asked, though, about whether the Chancellor is, as you say, toast, and in what sense may he be regarded as that. You could talk about whether his position as Chancellor of the Exchequer is under threat. I think that's probably unlikely, given the circumstances around the cost of living crisis and the absence of any obvious alternative to replace him, and his position around the pandemic and furlough and everything else from that, and the benefits that were gained from that. But there is a question about whether he is as popular as he once was, and the answer to that is most definitely not. But that should not be a surprise to anyone, least of all to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. 2 years ago, during the height of the pandemic, the Chancellor was enjoying more than 2/3 of people saying that he was doing a good job. But all most people knew about him at that stage was that he was handing out money as part of furlough, as part of Eat Out to Help Out and various other initiatives, but wasn't actually known for anything beyond that. It was inevitable that once the pandemic started to come to an end, once we transitioned back to normal times, there was going to be pain down the track, and that he would be at least to some degree held responsible for that. When you then throw in the issues around his own personal wealth and that of his family and his wife, it paints a very difficult picture for Rishi Sunak, and so it's no surprise to me at all that he's suffering in the polls as a result of that.
You talked about, obviously, the kind of difficulties chancellors have been through in the past. I mean, it's not the first time that budgets haven't gone terribly well. I mean, we remember things like Pastygate and the caravan tax and all that sort of stuff with George Osborne, and that was only George Osborne or Gordon Brown's reversal on tax changes to income tax. But it is quite difficult, isn't it, for prime ministers to move chancellors, even if the relationship isn't great, because they can become very awkward customers, either as demoted cabinet ministers or indeed on the backbenches.
Yes, and you just have to look to further back to how Geoffrey Howe, former Chancellor, was so damaging to Margaret Thatcher. How Norman Lamont's resignation after Black Wednesday was damaging to John Major, even if he didn't go as quickly as people might have expected him to. And so, yes, it's difficult to move chancellors, and what I think we've seen over the last few weeks is a shift in the power base in Whitehall, a move from the Chancellor back to Downing Street. Prior to that, Downing Street was very much weakened, and the Prime Minister very much weakened as a result of Partygate. But as the cost of living crisis started to bite, we saw from really February onwards a decline in the Chancellor's fortunes that was then accelerated by the spring statements and the recent revelations. And so power has moved back, at least to some degree, to Boris Johnson. He's managed to reclaim some of that. The question is whether he will be able to now hold on to it and make the most of it. Whether Rishi Sunak will find that his wings are clipped, and what the implications are for other departments. Would people in ministers and others in other departments who previously were wary of going up against someone so popular, will they now perhaps push back against some of the cuts to their own departments that are coming in?
Joe, as always, great analysis. Joe Twyman there from Delta Poll. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. The ebb and flow of politics there. Don't forget to get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at gbnews on any of today's stories. Coming up in the next 30 minutes is drug driving, the new drink driving. We'll be talking about that, plus the return of allotments. That's all before the news, or after.
It is 12:30. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date. Now, the UK has warned all options will be on the table when it comes to the West's response if Russia uses chemical weapons in Ukraine. The government says it's working urgently to verify claims that chemical weapons were used in an attack on the besieged city of Mariupol. It's after the Foreign Secretary described any such action as a callous escalation in the conflict. The Conservative MP Crispin Blunt has apologised for defending convicted sex offender Imran Ahmed Khan. The Wakefield MP appeared in court yesterday and was found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy in 2008. He's now been expelled from the Tory party. Crispin Blunt had said that Khan was the victim of a dreadful miscarriage of justice, but he retracted that statement this morning. At least 30 new fines are going to be issued over COVID breaches at Downing Street and Whitehall, bringing the total now to more than 50. The Met Police is investigating a dozen gatherings held during lockdown. Scotland Yard says more fines could come. More than 60 Extinction Rebellion activists have blocked the entrance to Lloyd's of London. The demonstrators are demanding the company stop insuring fossil fuel projects. Well, they're using superglue, chains and bike locks and say their aim is to close the business for a day by preventing staff from entering the building. You're up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and radio. Don't go anywhere. Darren will be back, I promise, in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News. It is 25 minutes to 1 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Now, with the cost of living crisis continuing to bite, many are returning to old practices like growing your own vegetables. And allotments are making a comeback, helping people to grow their food, get fresh air, as well as improving their mental health. Dougie Beattie, our Northern Ireland reporter, has got along to find out what is happening, why allotments are making a comeback, and of course, to give a helping hand.
Britain's rebuilding programme from the 40s to the 60s saw high-rise living become the norm. Food shortages and high prices meant allotments supplied by the councils would help feed the nation. Places such as this went from necessity in the 40s to hobby in the 90s. The arrival of highly processed food meant everyday costs went down. The need for make, do and mend and grow your own was no longer necessary. Councils sold much of these areas off for development, but now they're having a revival. John Reid says it's about much more than food.
The main aim is fun and a bit of fellowship with my son when he has time. He's a busy man. So we've planted, last year we had a crop of strawberries, raspberries, rhubarb, peas, broad beans, potatoes.
Many hands make light work, and Emma Wallace says getting others involved is the way forward.
Well, I bought a shed in the January sales, and see, I really back myself. This is the problem. I think I'll be able to put up that shed no problem on my own. And then of course it arrived in February and it was very windy. It sat here for a month and a half and I just struggled to get it up myself. So I've called in a few favours from a few friends, and my lovely boyfriend is here today to help put up the shed. So definitely a slow process, but my uncle always said that gardening was believing in tomorrow, and I always thought that was a really nice sentiment, sort of, you know, you're slowly planning the future but also enjoying the moment.
Even in this tranquil setting, the protocol is having an effect, and Erin Gibson is frustrated at the availability of seed.
I used to get my wee plants, some of the wee plants from England, and which we can't get now, and seeds is very hard to get as well. Like I've waited 3 weeks there on pea seeds coming back in again to the shops. They're just not getting them in.
Sisters Margaret and Sharon are on their second year and say it was hard at the start, but it's an excellent weekend activity.
We struggled big time, but we really enjoyed it, honestly. From the top of the allotment right down, it was just like a field. Oh, we love it every Saturday. It keeps us away from shops and all sorts.
With food prices continuing to rise, allotments may well be the answer to seeing those green shoots of recovery. Growing your own food brings its own rewards, but it takes time, patience and a little bit of help. Dougie Beattie, GB News, County Down.
I was kind of hoping we'd see Dougie with a spade in hand, but that clearly wasn't the case. Maybe you've got an allotment, and it is making a comeback. Lots of you have been getting in touch, though. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Virginia says, hi, what is being discussed on matters that have been blown up by the media? This isn't just kick the Tory time. Does anyone ever check into Labour's taxes, etc.? I wouldn't trust any of them. Personal life should remain private. It's not in the public interest to split families up because of how the media feel, and that's in relation to Rishi Sunak. And Joy says, please have a discussion on the Bitcoin that Boris is discussing at the G7. It appears if we all convert our banks to one bank controlled by the Bank of England, we'll lose a lot of control over our money. Governments could even tell us how to spend our money. And Dee says, if it is true, this is on the chemical weapons issue, and that there have been chemical weapons factories in Ukraine, which have been financed by the US and hidden from worldview. Does that mean that it's been hit by a Russian bomb? It seems that no one wants to talk about that, though it must be said that that is a conspiracy theory to a large degree that's not been proven, indeed, by anyone, apart from people ranting and raving online. Also, just to bring you up to date with the story that people have been talking about, and that is this police fines, an extra 30 police fines that we've seen handed out to Downing Street staff and Whitehall staff in the last 24 hours or so by the Metropolitan Police. It's just been issued this morning, that statement. We've heard from Matt Fowler. He's the co-founder of COVID's Bereaved Families for Justice, those that have lost loved ones. And he says, there you have it. It's now indisputable that whilst bereaved families were unable to be at their loved one's side in the last moments or stood at the funerals alone, the people responsible for protecting us in Downing Street were partying and rule-breaking en masse. It's a reality that is unbelievably painful for bereaved families like mine to face as we try and move forward with our lives. So that's a reaction there from the Bereaved Families for Justice in relation to those police fines that have been handed out by the Met in relation to Partygate inside Downing Street. OK, let's return to that issue of the possible use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. We know it's something that Western governments are looking into. Earlier today, we spoke to James Heappey, the Foreign Office Minister, about all of this. And this is what he had to say on those investigations and the allegations of the use of chemical weapons in and around Mariupol.
Well, look, as the Prime Minister said the other week, there is real value in ambiguity because I think there's a deterrent effect on President Putin if he knows that all options are on the table. but we don't give him the opportunity to make a judgment over whether any particular response is worth doing it in the first place. But all options on the table means everything that it sounds like. And that's an important thing for him to know. It's an important thing for Ukrainians to know. It's an important thing for British citizens to know.
How confident do you feel that we're actually going to be able to ascertain what's happened?
Well, reasonably confident. I think that there are, overnight, defence intelligence here in London haven't been able to verify, and nor have our colleagues in intelligence agencies around the world. And in fact, nor have the Ukrainians been able to verify it yet. President Zelensky only referred to reports of the use of chemical weapons rather than himself saying they definitely had been used. Clearly, we will rely heavily on evidence from the Ukrainians, but there are other ways which I wouldn't want to discuss on air that we'll be able to gather some evidence as well.
How concerned are you, and how concerned is the government at what we are seeing the Russians do at the moment? I don't mean in the specific attacks, horrific as they are, but in the regrouping that we're seeing taking place?
So I suppose it's an interesting answer, because I'm concerned in that I think that the fighting that is going to happen this spring and this summer in the Donbass is going to be extremely violent and will be quite a big army on quite a big army. I'm relieved that the Russians have clearly abandoned their original plans, and that Kyiv and central Ukraine will no longer be directly in this conflict, that everything is going to be focused on the Donbass. And already we're seeing life in Kyiv start to return to normal. So in that sense, it's a good thing. But I also think there's a big opportunity, because I think Putin's hubris has defined much of what has happened in the conflict so far. And I think his hubris is at play in the plan that the Russians now appear to be executing. They clearly have the May the 9th victory parade in mind as a date by which they need to have achieved something. And so I think that what we're going to find is Russian forces being thrown into the Donbass at a time of year when the ground is incredibly muddy. The time to do armoured manoeuvre in Ukraine is either in the dead of winter when the ground is frozen, or in the height of summer when the ground is hard. And I think what we're about to see is long Russian armoured columns stuck on roads. And as we saw north of Kyiv 3 weeks ago, that presents some pretty easy pickings for the Ukrainians.
There we go. That was James Heapy, who is not a Foreign Office Minister, as suggested, but actually the Minister for the Armed Forces, speaking a little earlier on GB News. Let's move on to talk about universities now, because the reports that actually people from the ONS are going around universities and checking on the quality of online lectures, as many continue to use online lectures in the wake of the pandemic, and many students have literally not come back into lecture halls. But do these lectures online, are they still necessary? Can we judge the quality of them? And frankly, should universities still be using them, given that largely life is returning to normal in many other parts of industry, culture and the country? Well, join me now to discuss all of this is Tom Richmond. He is the founder and director of EDSK. Tom, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Just give us a sense of how many universities are still using online lectures as a primary way of teaching their students.
So according to the Office for Students, which is the higher education regulator, it's still around 2/3 of universities are using some form of online learning. I wouldn't say that's bad for all students. To be fair, if you've got students who, with disabilities and health conditions, they found this big switch over to online learning to actually open up more opportunities for them. However, there's a lot of students who are still asking themselves, I've paid £9,250 a year. I didn't ask for these online lectures and I don't necessarily want them, but I'm still being stuck with them as a result of the university's choices. And this is where we're starting to see, I think, a lot of friction.
And what are the university's choices in all of this, Tom? Is it that this is about, frankly, saving money to a degree, or that it's easier? Because, as you say, many students at least feel that it's not as good. It's to the detriment of their education.
The Office for Students think that there is a genuine risk that this is being driven by cost cutting rather than because it provides a better educational experience. And ultimately, it is only right that we conclude that it is cheaper to deliver things online. You don't need the premises, you don't need the equipment, you don't need the laboratories, you don't need the seminar rooms and the lecture halls. So I think it's wrong for universities to say that there's no sort of cost implications from this. But the question is, well, what can students do about it? It's a real struggle for them. Even in just 2 months from now, the students who are going to be starting in university in September this year are going to be making their choices of degrees and universities. But they still don't know how many of those lectures they're going to get in September are going to be online. How many are going to be in person? Are they going to have tutorials and seminars in person, or are they going to move online as well? It's this lack of transparency that I think is the worst part of this situation, because even if some students prefer online learning and some don't, if you just don't give students the information to make a choice, that's where I think the government is absolutely right to put pressure on universities.
Is there any kind of financial recourse in all of this, i.e. if you signed up under the impression that you're going to be taught by someone in person, but actually it's online, that you could get your money back or some of it back?
Well, believe it or not, if you've got a complaint about the use of online learning, the first port of call is for you to complain to your university. This is often quite a slow and painful process, unfortunately, for students. And even then, because universities haven't set out in writing what they were going to do to start with, it's very hard for a student to then turn around and say, well, you didn't do what you told me you were going to do, because universities don't really say very much at all about how much online learning they're going to offer. So not only do we have first-year students maybe starting in this September who don't know what they're going to be getting, but we've got second and third year students who are going to be going back again, who still don't know what they're going to be getting. So yes, in theory, there is a process, complain to your university, and then there is an independent adjudicator you can complain to afterwards. But the problem is, if universities haven't been forced to set out in writing what they're going to deliver, it's very hard for a student or indeed a parent to turn around and say, where's the value for money for me? £9,250 is a very significant investment for students and their families. And yet without that transparency, I just don't think the system's fair on students at the moment. And universities are, I think, getting away with too much flexibility. And the government and the Office for Students should rightly be putting more pressure on them and potentially fining universities who just don't live up to expectations.
Yeah, indeed, not least of all, Tom, because obviously lots of students aren't just doing the degrees at university and that £9,000 tuition fees that you talked about, but often have moved to where the university is and is paying things like rent, etc., through student loans, which results in them paying tens of thousands of pounds over the course of their lifetime and paying that loan off. Just very finally in all of this though is at a time in which there are, frankly, more students going to university, not least of all the return of lots of international students too.
And I think that's where, if there's just a basic question of fairness and transparency, then universities really need to get themselves in order here. Because if you're moving from somewhere else in the world, let alone from somewhere else in this country, and you turn up and actually a lot of your course is being delivered to you in your university dorm room, sitting at a laptop, then I think you have every right to turn around and say, why have I made that investment? When we talk about students in this country ending up £45,000 to £50,000 in debt now, only around £27,000, £28,000 of that is tuition fees. The rest of that, like you say, is living costs. It's accommodation costs. And if you're moving somewhere else and you're taking on that debt burden, it is only right that you're able to make that choice on an informed basis, that you've got all the facts, you've got all the information about your course. And if universities still, even after 2 years, of COVID, if they're still just not being honest and straight with students about what they're getting, then I think the government has to step in, as does the Office for Students, the regulator, and just saying, at the very least, tell your students what they're going to get for their money. And if they choose to come along to a university, then fantastic. If they choose to move from across the world, fantastic. But you can't have a situation where universities make up their mind after the students come through the door and handed over their money. That's simply not right for students or their families.
Indeed, really valid point. Transparency at the heart of all of this. Tom, fascinating stuff. Tom Richmond there from EDSK. Thank you so much indeed for joining us here on GB News this afternoon. Thank you, Tom. OK, let's move on now, because there are concerns that the rising cost of living could also force swimming pools to close half of public swimming pools within the next 12 months. Gas and electricity prices are expected to double by the end of the year, which can add a further £100,000 to bills, according to campaigners. Community Leisure UK are now calling for the government to invest £1 billion to help protect public swimming pools. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has more.
We're seeing massive rises in the cost of living in homes, up to £700 a year that most people on average are paying on the price of their electricity and gas. But for big businesses that run leisure centres, or for local district councils that run their swimming pools for the community, there are some really worrying costs. There's figures out recently from UK Active that show a 150% rise in the costs for the leisure industry. It is something that's very worrying. Last year, Swim England in September came out with a report about the decline of the swimming industry, expecting 4,600 swimming pools that are open in England right now, expecting 2,000 of them to close by the end of the decade. It's a really difficult time for the industry. A lot of people are calling on government support. And here now to tell me a little bit more from Lammas Leisure Centre here in Sutton in Ashfield is Lorenzo Clark. Lorenzo, we're here at the swimming pool today. For people watching at home, there's the obvious things that you'd expect in a swimming pool. It's wet, but it's also incredibly warm, and there's a smell of chlorine. What's the deal with keeping this place so warm at the moment? How much is it costing a company like Everyone Active that's running it for the local council?
I mean, basically what you're looking at now is you're looking at tens of thousands of pounds added per month to a typical leisure centre, which has a lot of water like we've got here. We've got 2 pools in this building, and we've got an ice rink as well, which again uses the utility side of it. And I suppose on an annual basis you're looking at about £60,000 just for a centre like this in terms of increased costs.
And this is, it seems to be quite a nice leisure centre. It seems to be quite modern. What's the state of this leisure centre and your other leisure centres, and maybe how does it compare to some of the older leisure centres where you might be losing a lot of heat and it's just escaping through the roofs in maybe old listed buildings?
Yeah, I mean, this leisure centre is 13 years old. We've got a brand new one going to open in July in Kirkby itself, and we're putting a new pool at Hucknall as well. And so from that point of view, we've got the modern technology, so we have all these fancy gizmos in terms of behind the scenes in the pool plant areas. We're putting solar PVC on the roof and everything else like that as well. We reclaim the heat from the ice rink to actually help heat the swimming pools here. But in old buildings, basically you can't do a lot with them. Yes, you might be able to insulate them a bit more, but you might be able to put a more modern boiler in. But apart from that, you've got what you've got. You've got a brick-based building where the heat literally goes through the roof.
And we talked about the smell of chlorine. We know that we're having problems with supplies in a variety of different things, fertiliser, a lot of stuff coming from the east of Europe, bordering onto Asia. What's the situation with chlorine and getting that into places like this?
We're now having to order at least a month in advance just to make sure we get our sodium hypochlorite or our calcium hypochlorite delivered to the site. And we're even getting time delay and reduced orders on that because of the war in Ukraine and you know, the troubles with Russia. Obviously the costs of that are now going up disproportionately as well, because it's supply and demand as with everything else. So we're having to source new chemicals from elsewhere.
Lorenzo, thank you so much for talking to us. We did actually speak to the Department of Business last night, hoping to get a statement about the state of swimming pools and that bid for government support, but we didn't hear anything back by the time that we recorded this broadcast.
There you go. That was a reporter, Will Hollis, talking about swimming pools and the potential closure in the year ahead, given the cost of living crisis, which is affecting lots and lots of people. And on that, actually, people have got in touch via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Mick saying he wouldn't trust Rachel Reeves with his goddaughter's piggy bank, let alone the economy. Mick says sounds like another media-generated furore over Rishi Sunak. Whether he's lost his chance of becoming Prime Minister or not, we're a light ways away from the next general election. And on that issue, we're just talking about universities. Michael says online learning without practical experience will produce inadequately or underqualified students. OK, well, that is it from me. As always, do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at gbnews. I'm back at 3 o'clock this afternoon with another briefing on the latest political news, not at least all those fines around Partygate and further scandals for the Conservative Party. And we'll have more on Keir Starmer's interview with us in Scotland a little bit later. Up next, though, it is a double bumper bonanza of Liam Halligan for 2 hours. He is on the money at 1 o'clock. But first, let's bring you up to date with all the latest weather from the Met Office, and I'll see you later.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGiven. It's been a wet start to Tuesday for many of us. That rain now moving north, warming up in the south behind the rain with some sunshine, but also a scattering of heavy showers. Low pressure keeping things unsettled at the moment. That low pressure sitting to the southwest of the UK. It is, however, drawing up some warmth from the south, along with these bands of rain. One band of rain clearing from the Northern Isles, although sticking around for much of the day for Shetland, and the next turning up into central, eastern and southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland and northern England, and also a few more outbreaks of rain stretching back into central England. Otherwise, skies brightening and temperatures rising. Could see 20 or 21 Celsius, somewhere like East Anglia this afternoon. However, for eastern and southern Scotland, northern England, feeling cold with that rain and a strong wind from the North Sea. Heavy showers breaking out as the day comes to an end across much of England and Wales, and then further showers continuing into western parts through the night, whilst the persistent rain carries on in the far northeast of Scotland, along with the brisk wind. But for most, it's a frost-free night, a good deal of cloud cover, low cloud at that, so a gloomy start to Wednesday. A lot of mist and sea fog around some of these western, southern and northeastern shores. The rain in the far northeast of Scotland tends to ease through the day. It continues, I think, for Orkney and Shetland.